Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Every Zerdalian schoolchild knew the fundamental truth. When shields fail during entry, life ceases. No exceptions. It was more than a saying. It was a fundamental truth of space travel. One that Mila had learned during her first cycle of education, which was why the readings on her neutral interface made absolutely no sense. The ship had been torn apart, hull integrity compromised in 17 places, life support systems obliterated, and yet, movement. Impossible, inexplicable movement among the wreckage. Mila's pale blue scales caught the soft light as she leaned forward in her station. The Central Investigation Bureau of Zereldia occupied the entirety of the 87th floor in the administrative tower. A marvel of engineering with its reinforced titanium walls and automated security doors, all controlled through neural interfaces like the one currently feeding data directly into her brain. The smooth, cold surfaces of her workstation reflected the soft blue-green glow from the long tubes of bioluminescent bacteria that lined the ceiling. The preferred lighting method of her species. "Chief Investigator?" she said, her voice soft but urgent. "You should see this." Venix didn't respond immediately. His emerald scales had dulled somewhat with age, but his imposing stature, standing just over 2 meters tall, hadn't diminished. His neck frill, displaying natural markings in pale yellow, expanded slightly as he processed whatever information was streaming through his own neural implant. The vertical pupils of his eyes narrowed to thin slits as he concentrated. Mila knew better than to interrupt. As a junior investigator with a smaller head crest signifying her lower age and status, protocol demanded she wait. But the data was screaming at her. "Movements in the impact zone," she finally said when his attention shifted her way. "The satellite imagery shows maybe a life form?" Venix's muscular tail moved, a sign of annoyance or interest. Mila wasn't certain. "The crash was catastrophic," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The pirates struck the vessel in deep space, forcing it to land here. Nothing survives that kind of structural compromise, junior investigator. The heat alone would—" "With respect, sir," Mila interrupted, knowing she was overstepping but unable to contain herself. "The satellite imagery taken after impact shows something seething in the debris settlement." A flick of Venix's wrist brought up the same data stream on his own interface. His head crest rose slightly, a sign of surprise. "Environmental contamination?" he said flatly. "The vessel's propulsion system likely contained unstable elements that are causing localized reactions with our atmosphere." Mila had anticipated this response. "I've already run a spectral analysis, sir. No unusual chemical signatures beyond what we'd expect from standard warp engines." Around them, other Zerdalian investigators moved through their tasks, their neural interfaces linking them to a vast data network that monitored everything from orbital traffic to deep-sea volcanic activity. None paid attention to the quiet debate between the chief investigator and his junior officer, an alien crash in the middle of a distant forest not being enough to cause any stir in such ancient world. "Probability of survival was calculated at 0.03%, Venix said, his tone making it clear he considered the matter settled. "Which means it's not zero?" Mila countered. She knew she was taking a risk by challenging him, but something about this situation felt different. Important, somehow. "Sir, what if something did survive?" Venix's tail shifted again, more pronounced this time. "Our medical protocols are species-specific, junior investigator. Even if, by some astronomical improbability, something survived that crash, we wouldn't be able to help it." "But we should at least confirm," Mila pressed. The vessel crossed into our territory. If there is a survivor, and they're sentient, it could be a diplomatic incident. If we don't at least attempt assistance, the Galactic Council would bother us for a century for that." This argument seemed to land. Venix's neck frill flattened against his neck, a sign he was considering her point seriously. "The ancient forest is 30 minutes by atmospheric craft," Miller added. "We could deploy drones for preliminary reconnaissance, assess from a safe distance if you allow it." Venix remained silent for several moments, his vertical pupils dilating and contracting as he processed the options. Miller held her breath, trying not to fidget. Her smaller head crest might mark her as a junior, but her analytical skills had earned her this position on Venix's team. "Very well," Venix finally said, his voice betraying a hint of reluctance. "Prepare 3 reconnaissance drones with full sensor packages. We'll deploy from the southern landing platform in 15 minutes. Relief flooded through Miller. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Venix said, standing to his full height. "If this is nothing but debris and atmospheric distortion, it will be noted in your efficiency rating." Miller swallowed her nervousness. "Understood, sir." 15 minutes later, they stood on the southern landing platform, the gleaming lights of the Zerdalian capital stretching out below them. The atmospheric craft, a sleek, oval-shaped vessel with a transparent top dome, waited as Venix and Miller loaded the reconnaissance drones into the deployment bay. "The crash site is 173 kilometers south-southwest," Miller reported as they boarded. "The ancient forest will provide some challenges for sensor penetration, but the impact created a substantial clearing." Venix merely nodded as he initiated the craft's neural interface. The engines activated, a gentle vibration that traveled through the floor plates and into Miller's sensitive feet. As the craft rose smoothly into the air, Miller struggled to contain her excitement. This was her first field assignment since joining the Central Investigation Bureau 3 cycles ago. Most junior investigators spent years analyzing data streams before ever seeing an actual crash site. "The vessel was unregistered," Venix said as they gained altitude. "Our atmospheric monitoring systems detected it only 8 minutes before the impact. Barely enough time to issue warnings to nearby settlements." "Origin?" Miller asked, accessing her neural interface to pull up the initial reports. "Unknown trajectory suggests it came from the Aurelian sector, but that's a trading hub for 17 different species." Miller processed this information. "And the pirates?" "Known criminals. Zerdalian outcasts who prey on vulnerable vessels close to our system. Their ship was also lost in the engagement, but it never reached the ground." The craft accelerated, the capital city rapidly shrinking behind them as they headed towards the vast green expanse of the ancient forest. Miller watched the landscape change below them, from the ordered shapes of the city to the winding river systems of the agricultural regions, and finally, to the untamed wilderness that covered nearly 60% of their planet's largest continent. "Impact zone approaching," Venix announced after 27 minutes of flight. "Preparing drones for deployment." Miller gasped involuntarily as the crash site came into view. A massive wound had been torn in the ancient forest. Trees flattened in a radius of nearly a kilometer. The rich soil churned up and scattered. In the center lay the twisted remains of what had once been a spacecraft, now little more than shredded metal and composite materials. Small fires still burned in places, sending columns of dark smoke into the sky. "Catastrophic," Venix stated flatly. "As expected." But Miller's eyes were drawn to something else, a small clearing near the edge of the destruction, where the pattern of debris seemed different, organized somehow. "Sir," she said, pointing. "There. Do you see it?" Venix squinted, his vertical pupils contracting to thin lines. "Deploy Drone 2 to the sector. Full sensor sweep." The drone detached from their craft with a soft hiss, its anti-gravity generators allowing it to descend smoothly towards the target area. Miller watched its progress on her neural interface. the data stream showing atmospheric composition, radiation levels, and heat signatures. "Sir," she said, her voice a whisper as the readings came in, "I'm detecting a biological signature." Venix leaned forward, his neck frill extending in surprise. Impossible! The crash temperatures alone would have—" "It's moving," Mila interrupted, unable to contain herself. "Whatever it is, it's moving." The drone's visual feed showed it now, a figure moving among the wreckage, bipedal, using tools to shift smaller pieces of debris, constructing something. "By the first egg," Venix breathed, an ancient Zerdalian expression of shock. "It survived." Mila's mind raced. In all recorded Zerdalian history, there had never been a documented case of survival from a catastrophic atmospheric entry failure. It was considered physically impossible. The forces involved simply too extreme for biological matter to withstand. "We need to establish contact," she said, already calculating approach vectors in her mind. "No," Venix said sharply. "We observe first. Deploy the remaining drones. Full perimeter surveillance. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before we make our presence known." Merla complied, but couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure moving amongst the wreckage. It was clearly injured. Its movements spoke of pain, but it was alive. It had survived what no living being should have been able to survive. "What is it?" she whispered, more to herself than to Venix. The chief investigator's response was somber. "Something that shouldn't exist, junior investigator. And that makes it potentially dangerous." As the remaining drones deployed and began their surveillance pattern, Merla knew with absolute certainty that nothing in her career, or perhaps in all of Zerdalian science, would ever be the same after today. Whatever this creature was, it had done the impossible. It had survived. The atmospheric craft settled into a holding pattern above the crash site as Merla's neural interface processed the drone data. Each new reading contradicted everything she knew about physics, biology, and survival. "Initiating thermal mapping," she announced, her voice steady despite her growing excitement. The rich, loamy soil of the ancient forest had been churned up by the crash, releasing an earthy perfume that mixed with the sharp tang of torn vegetation and hot metal. Even from their altitude, the environmental sensors detected the complex mixture of organic and artificial compounds. "Multiple anomalies," Venix noted, his neck frill rippling with concern. "The creature's body temperature is far higher than any known spacefaring species." Miller adjusted the drone's sensors, focusing on the being's heat signature. "Perhaps it's a sign of severe infection or cellular breakdown?" But even as she suggested it, she knew it wasn't true. The movements were too fast, too coordinated for a dying creature. A sudden alert flashed across her neural interface. "Sir, movement in Sector 7!" The figure had spotted one of their drones. Instead of showing fear or aggression, it simply stopped, watched. Then, to Miller's astonishment, it raised what appeared to be an appendage in a deliberate gesture. "It's signaling us," she breathed. "Or warning us," Venix countered, his tail twitching with agitation. "Maintain distance. We don't know what—" The rest of his sentence was lost as the figure suddenly bolted, disappearing into the dense undergrowth of the ancient forest, with surprising speed. The drone's sensors struggled to track it through the thick canopy. "We can't lose it," Mila exclaimed, already calculating pursuit vectors. "Sir, permission to—" "Denied," Venix said sharply. "The ancient forest harbors numerous apex predators. If that creature runs blindly into Shadow Stalker territory—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Shadow Stalkers were the deadliest predators on Zerdalia. Massive beasts with obsidian scales and retractable bone blades. Even armed military units avoided their hunting grounds. "We need to alert the Planetary Defense Force," Venix continued, his vertical pupils narrowing to thin slits. "If this being is hostile—" "With respect, sir," Merla interrupted. "A hostile entity wouldn't have run. It's afraid, possibly because it knows the criminals who attacked its ship are from our species." Venix's head crest rose slightly, a sign he was considering her words. "Explain." "The pirates who attacked its ship were Zerdalian," she said quickly. "From its perspective, we might appear to be more attackers rather than investigators." A low rumble emerged from Venix's throat. "A logical assessment. However, this doesn't change the immediate problem. If it dies in our forest, it becomes a diplomatic incident. If it survives and makes contact with a settlement, it becomes a security risk." Merla watched the thermal readings from the forest, tracking the faint heat signature as it moved deeper into the wilderness. The being was moving with surprising purpose, as if it had some destination in mind. "Sir," she said carefully, "I believe we should consider the possibility that this creature is more capable than we assume. It survived an unsurvivable crash. It already demonstrated strategic thinking. Perhaps we should approach this not as a rescue or containment operation, but as first contact." Venix's tail went completely still, a sign he was deeply focused. "You believe it's friendly?" "Friendly or not, it's just one individual," Merla said. "The shelter it was constructing showed clear engineering principles. Its reaction to our drones indicated recognition of artificial surveillance, and its escape route," she highlighted the thermal trail on their shared neural interface, "it's not running randomly. We could attempt to communicate with it." A long moment passed as Venix processed this information. Finally, his neck frill expanded, slightly, a gesture of acceptance. "Prepare a ground expedition. Minimal armament, full scientific package. We'll establish a forward base at the crash site and attempt peaceful contact." Relief flooded through Merla. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet, junior investigator," Venix said, already signaling for additional resources through his neural interface. "If this being is friendly, we are required to assist it. And now that we're here, we can't turn a blind eye and make it somebody else's problem. If we handle this badly, both of our efficiency ratings will be on the line." She only nodded, and, as they began their descent towards the crash site, Merla couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Whatever this creature was, it had already rewritten what she thought she knew about the possible, and something told her that this was only the beginning. Through the view screen, she watched the sun setting over the ancient forest, casting long shadows through the smoke that still rose from the crash site. Somewhere in those shadows, something impossible waited, something that had survived, and Merla intended to find out how. The shadows lengthened across the crash site as Merla calibrated the perimeter sensors of their hastily established base camp. 3 days had passed since their first sighting of the impossible survivor, and each day brought new surprises. The being, the one they still hadn't established direct contact, had proven remarkably adept at evading their observation drones while simultaneously building what appeared to be increasingly sophisticated survival structures. "Movement in Sector 12, her neural interface alerted. She adjusted the visual feed, focusing on a small clearing where their target had created what seemed to be some sort of water collecting system using debris from the crash. The sophistication of the design suggested not just intelligence, but significant practical engineering knowledge. "It adjusted to our environment far too quickly," Venix muttered from his position at the command center. Their base camp, though modest, provided clear views of the surrounding forest while maintaining a non-threatening presence. "No species should be able to survive so well on an alien world." Merla watched as the figure, now clearly identifiable as bipedal with distinctive upper limb mobility, moved with great speed through its camp. "Sir, I believe it's time we attempted direct communication. The longer we wait, the more it might perceive us as hostile observers rather than potential allies. A low rumble emerged from Venix's throat, but before he could respond, their perimeter sensors triggered a proximity alert. The figure had changed its pattern. It was approaching their camp. "Hold positions," Venix ordered as Merla reached for her defensive equipment. "Let it make the first move." Merla's heart raced as she watched the being emerge from the forest's edge. It walked upright, its external covering damaged but clearly designed for space travel. Its facial features were unlike anything she'd seen in her xenobiology studies. Flat, with forward-facing eyes and a distinctive lack of scales. To everyone's surprise, the creature spoke. "I know you're not with the pirates," it said, in nearly perfect Zerdalian thanks to some device, though the accent was strange. "Your observation patterns are too non-aggressive. A research team?" Merla glanced at Venix, who gave a slight nod. She stepped forward, keeping her movements slow. "I am Junior Investigator Merla of the Central Investigation Bureau. We've been monitoring your survival since the crash." "James Lawrence," the creature replied, making a gesture with its upper limb that seemed non-threatening. "And I figured you were monitoring me. Your drones aren't exactly subtle." "You understand our language?" Venix interjected, his neck frill expanding slightly in surprise. "Universal translator from the Council." James tapped a small device near what appeared to be his auditory organ. "Damaged in the crash, but I managed to repair it. Your language patterns are actually quite similar to Regelian Standard." Merla's analytical mind raced with questions. The being, James, showed no signs of physical trauma that should have accompanied such a catastrophic crash. More importantly, he showed no fear of them despite his earlier evasion. "You ran from us," she said, unable to contain her curiosity. "But now you approach openly. Why?" James made a motion with his facial muscles that Merla's xenobiology training suggested might be a sign of amusement. "Needed to assess your intentions first. The pirates who shot me down were your species, but their behavior was different. You, on the other hand, set up a research camp and observation posts. Scientists, not hunters." "Your survival should not have been possible," Venix stated flatly. "The structural damage to your vessel—" "Oh, that?" James shrugged, another fascinating movement. "Not my first crash. Humans are pretty good at surviving things we shouldn't. Something about our evolutionary history, I guess. We're kind of known for it across the galaxy." "Humans?" Merla repeated, storing the term in her neural interface for later research. "And this is common for your species?" "Surviving impossible situations? More common than you'd think. There was this one time on Europa." James stopped suddenly, his head tilted in a way that reminded Merla of a hunting shadow stalker. "You hear that?" Merla was about to respond when her neural interface lit up with proximity warnings. Something large was moving through the underbrush, heading towards their position. Something that shouldn't be in this sector at all. "Shadow stalker!" Venix hissed, his tail rigid with alarm. "Back to the ship, now!" But James didn't move. Instead, he turned toward the sound, his posture shifting in a way that defied all of Merla's understanding of common-sense behavior. He wasn't showing fear. He was showing interest. "You should take cover," Merla urged, moving toward him. "These creatures are apex predators. They—" "Yeah, I've seen them around my camp," James said casually. "They're actually pretty interesting once you get to know them. Watch this." Before anyone could stop him, James made a series of clicking sounds with his mouth. The rustling in the underbrush stopped. Then, to Merla's utter astonishment, a massive shadow stalker emerged from the forest. Not in an attack posture, but with its bone blades retracted and its head lowered. "This is One Eye," James said, as if introducing a colleague. "He's been helping me keep the smaller predators away from my camp, haven't you, big guy?" The shadow stalker, one of its eyes indeed appeared to be damaged, moved closer to James. completely ignoring the Zerdalian research team. It made a low, rumbling sound that Merla had never heard before in all of her studies of native wildlife.
"Impossible,"
Venix whispered, his neck frill fully extended in shock.
"They're completely hostile to other species."
James reached out and actually touched the creature's armored head. "Yeah, I get that a lot, the whole impossible thing. You guys haven't come across any humans yet, have you?" Merla watched in fascination as the most dangerous predator on their world behaved like a domesticated animal under this alien's touch. She had a feeling their reports to the Central Investigation Bureau were about to get a lot more interesting. Days passed, and Merla found herself increasingly fascinated by the impossible human and his equally impossible companion. The Shadow Stalker, One Eye, as James called him, had become a constant presence at the crash site, much to the continuous distress of the Zerdalian security team they had arranged.
"He's getting bolder,"
Venix observed one morning, watching through the perimeter shields as James actually played some sort of game with the massive predator, throwing pieces of debris that One Eye would chase and retrieve.
"Both of them are."
Merla adjusted her neural interface, recording every interaction. The Shadow Stalker's behavior has completely deviated from all documented patterns. It's treating him like... She paused, searching for the right word. Like an equal. A series of booming laughs echoed across the clearing as James roughhoused with the creature, his hands expertly finding the spots between the bone blades where he would scratch without risk. One Eye's territorial rumble had transformed into something almost musical, a sound no Zerdalian had ever heard from the species before.
"The Central Bureau is demanding answers,"
Venix said quietly.
"They want to know why we haven't convinced him to accept proper shelter in the city. Medical attention, basic safety protocols."
"Have you shown them the footage?"
17 times. They still don't believe it."
His neck frill rippled with frustration.
"A human surviving atmospheric re-entry is one thing. Taming a shadow stalker? They think we've been compromised by some sort of hallucinogenic spore."
A sudden commotion drew their attention. One Eye had pinned James to the ground, but instead of the bloodbath any Zerdalian would expect, the human was laughing as the predator's long tongue swept across his face. "Stop it, you big lug," James pushed playfully at the creature's massive head. "Your breath stinks." Merla couldn't help but trill, a Zerdalian expression of amazement. "Sir, I don't think we're dealing with a tamed animal. This is something else entirely. A genuine cross-species bond."
"Which makes it even more dangerous,"
Venix countered.
"If the human leaves..."
"When?" Merla corrected. "His people will come for him eventually."
"When the human leaves," Venix amended, "what happens to the Shadow Stalker that's formed an emotional attachment? These creatures are apex predators for a reason. Their hunting territory spans hundreds of kilometers. If this one becomes aggressive after losing its... friend..."
James was now sitting with his back against One Eye's flank, casually tinkering with some salvaged equipment while the predator kept watch, its good eye scanning the forest with practiced efficiency. "Sir," Merla said carefully, "I don't think we're asking the right questions. We keep focusing on what should be impossible. The crash survival, the predator bonding, the rapid adaptation to our world. But maybe we should be asking why humans evolved these capabilities in the first place." Venix's tail moved, a sign he was intrigued.
"Explain."
James mentioned their evolutionary history. What kind of world produces a species that can survive almost anything? That can form bonds with apex predators? That treats the impossible as just another day? Before Venix could respond, their neural interfaces lit up with an alert. Something was approaching from the north. Something big. One Eye sensed it too. The Shadow Stalker rose to its full height, bone blades extending, but it didn't move away from James. Instead, it positioned itself between the human and the potential threat. "Well, that's new," James said, standing slowly. "We've got company, don't we?" Through the trees emerged another Shadow Stalker, Larger than One Eye, its scales a deeper shade of obsidian. It assessed the scene with cold calculation, focusing particularly on the Zerdalian camp.
Nobody move,
Venix ordered through the neural network.
defensive positions only.
But James was already walking forward, making the same clicking sounds he used with One Eye. The new Shadow Stalker's head snapped towards him, bone blades fully extended. "James!" Merla called out from the distance, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to run. "Perhaps this one isn't—" "They're all individuals," James said calmly, continuing his steady approach. "Just like us. You just have to show them respect. Isn't that right, beautiful?" The new Shadow Stalker took one step forward, then another. One Eye moved parallel to James, not interfering but clearly ready to act if needed. The clearing had gone completely still. To Merla's continuing amazement, the same process she had witnessed days ago began to unfold again. The new Shadow Stalker's bone blades slowly retracted. Its aggressive posture softened, and within minutes, James was running his hands along its scales while both predators made that strange musical rumbling sound. "I think I'll call you Nova," James said to the newcomer. "Those scales of yours remind me of a black hole I once saw up close. Another story for another time." Merla looked at Venix, whose neck frill was fully extended in shock. "Sir?" she said quietly. "I believe we need to update our report to the Central Bureau. This isn't just about survival anymore. This human... How do you even describe this level of lack of common sense?" James sat between the two massive predators, looking completely at peace. "You know," he called out to the Zerdalian camp, "once my people find me, you folks might want to reconsider your approach to Shadow Stalkers. They're not just mindless hunters. They're brilliant, social creatures. You've just been looking at them wrong this whole time." Merla's neural interface worked overtime, recording every detail of the scene. She had a feeling that long after James was rescued, long after he returned to whatever impossible world had produced his species, Zerdalian scientists would still be studying the impacts of his brief stay on the planet. And somewhere in the ancient forest, Shadow Stalkers would remember the strange creature who had seen them not as monsters, but as friends. The situation at the Central Investigation Bureau had become increasingly tense as James's stay on Zerdalia extended into its second week. Merla stood before the emergency committee, her neural interface projecting the latest observations of the humans' growing influence on the local ecosystem. "As you can see," she explained to the assembled officials, their neck frills stiff with concern, "it's not just the two Shadow Stalkers anymore. Smaller predators have begun to alter their behavior patterns around his camp. Even the territorial boundaries of local species are shifting." "This is unprecedented," Administrator Lex stated, her emerald scales dulled with age and worry. One alien surviving an impossible crash was concerning enough, but this level of environmental impact... Merla advanced her presentation to show James's expanding camp. He had created an intricate network of structures using crashed ship parts and local materials, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of simple engineering principles.
"He refuses all offers of proper accommodation,"
Venix added from his position by the door.
"Claims he's healthier in the forest than he would be in our climate-controlled facilities."
"And the most disturbing part," Merla continued, bringing up the latest thermal scans, "his biology appears to be suited to living on our planet. Everything he finds, he can eat." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. An alien who could survive anywhere, eat anything, and form bonds with the deadliest creatures on their world. It was scary. "What happens when his people arrive?" Administrator Lex finally asked. "These Shadow Stalkers, they've formed attachments. If he leaves..." "When?" Merla corrected automatically, then flushed as she realized she'd interrupted a superior. But Lex's neck frill expanded slightly, a sign of approval. "Yes, when? When he leaves. What becomes of these apex predators who've formed emotional bonds? Do they return to their natural state? Do they become more aggressive? Do they try to follow him? Merla brought up her final data set. Based on observed behavior patterns, I believe the changes are permanent. James hasn't tamed these creatures. He's taught them a new way of interacting with other species. They're learning, just as he is. And that's exactly what concerns us, Lex said. One human in less than 2 weeks has fundamentally altered the behavior of our most dangerous predator species. What would happen if more humans came? The question hung in the air. Through the window, they could see the ancient forest stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, a human played with monsters, rewrote history, and treated the impossible as routine. I don't know, Merla said carefully, but I sincerely believe we should just politely ask them to leave. The committee members exchanged glances, their neural interfaces working overtime with rapid data exchange. Finally, Administrator Lex's neck frill settled into a position of acceptance. Continue your observations, junior investigator, she said, but be prepared. When his people come, we need to be ready for whatever impossible things they bring with them. Merla nodded, already composing her next report in mind. In the distance, she heard the distinctive friendly rumble of shadow stalkers, a sound that had never existed on their world before James crashed into it. The arrival of the human rescue ship was as impossible as everything else about James Lawrence. No warning, no atmospheric entry disturbance. It simply appeared in low orbit one morning, its hull gleaming with technology that made Zerdalian ships look primitive in comparison. Merla stood at the edge of the crash site, watching James pack his makeshift camp with a casual approach. One Eye and Nova lounged nearby, their massive forms casting long shadows in the early morning light. Over the past 3 weeks, the predators had become such a common sight that even the most nervous Zerdalian researchers had stopped flinching at their presence. A communication alert flashed through their neural interfaces. The human ship was requesting landing coordinates. Merla felt a strange tightness in her chest as she processed the request. In just a few hours, their impossible visitor would be gone. About the shadow stalkers, she started, but James cut her off with a gentle smile. They'll be fine, he said, reaching down to scratch One Eye's armored head. I have a solution that would create trouble for your people. As if understanding his words, One Eye pressed his massive head against James's side, making that rumbling sound that they'd all grown accustomed to. Nova, typically more reserved, moved closer as well. The human ship's descent was silent, its technology somehow negating the usual atmospheric friction that had nearly killed James weeks ago. It settled in the clearing with impossible grace, its hull shifting and preparing to meet the terrain beneath it. Captain Nolan, James said as a tall figure emerged from the ship. Right on schedule. The new human, Nolan, took in the scene with remarkable composure, barely raising an eyebrow at the two massive predators flanking James. Lawrence, only you could crash on an unknown world and end up adopting the local wildlife. Not adopting, James corrected, his hand still resting on One Eye's scales. Just making friends. Merla watched as Captain Nolan approached, noting how the shadow stalkers tensed but remained calm. Another impossible achievement of James's short stay on their world. The Zerdalian government has been most cooperative, Nolan said, nodding to Venix, though they seem quite eager for us to depart their space quickly. Can't imagine why, James grinned, then turned serious. About that, Captain, we need to discuss something. Merla's neural interface pinged with confusion as James walked to the ship, gestured at various points of its hull, and engaged in a rapid discussion with Nolan. The captain's expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief, to something approaching resignation? You can't be serious, Nolan finally said. Completely serious, James replied. It's just a minor modification to the cargo hold. The atmospheric processes can handle it.
Lawrence, that's an apex predator.
2 apex predators, actually. 1 male, 1 female. Venix's neck frill extended fully.
You intend to take them with you?
James turned back to the Zerdalian researchers, his expression earnest. They've learned too much about interacting with other species. Leaving them here would be dangerous, for them and for your people. Besides, he patted One Eye's snout, we've got this research station in that one hell world that could really use some help with local predator species, and these two enjoy hunting with us. Merla watched in stunned silence as James proceeded to guide the 2 shadow stalkers into the human ship's cargo hold, which had somehow reconfigured itself into a habitat suitable for the massive predators. The beasts went willingly, their trust in him complete.
This is a first,
Captain Nolan muttered, but made no move to stop it.
Everything about humans seems to be a first,
Venix observed, his tail moving with what might have been amusement. James emerged from the ship one last time, approaching Merla and Venix. Thank you, he said simply, for giving me time to figure things out, for not insisting I come to your city. Merla felt her neck frill ripple with emotion. Will we see you again? Oh, probably, James smiled. Humans have a way of turning up where we're least expected. And now that we know about shadow stalkers, he gestured to where One Eye and Nova waited on the ship. Well, let's just say xenobiologists back home are going to be very interested in your world. As the human ship prepared for departure, Merla couldn't help but feel that they had witnessed something more than just first contact with an impossible species. They had seen a glimpse of what was possible when you stopped believing in impossible things. The ship rose silently into the sky, carrying with it a human who had survived the unsurvivable, 2 predators who had learned to trust, and countless questions about what other impossible things waited out amongst the stars.
Well,
Venix said as the ship vanished from the view,
I suppose we should prepare our final report for the Central Bureau.
Merla nodded, already composing the opening lines in her mind. But how could she possibly explain everything they'd witnessed? How could she describe a being who treated the impossible as merely improbable, who saw friends where others saw monsters, who had changed their world simply by crashing into it? In the end, she decided to begin with the simplest truth. They had a saying on Zerdalia about things being impossible, but that was before they met the humans.